Good morning everybody, welcome to Sunday's Indycar. I'm Gordon Ross. This morning I wanted to talk to you a little bit about John Major's recent comments about the Conservative Party and about the likelihood of not only a hard Brexit but a no deal Brexit. Major was interviewed on the Andrew Marr show this morning. He's been speaking also in the newspapers a lot recently about his analysis of the situation within the Tory party and within the Westminster government as well. He pointed out rightly, I find myself unusually agreeing with Major about something, that initially the problems of the European Union and those who wish to leave it were primarily a Tory problem, because it was the Conservative government which brought us into what used to be known as the EEC, the European Economic Community, which then morphed into the European Union. And it was the Tories who have traditionally had a political infight going on permanently within their ranks over whether or not we should remain in the EU or not. Now, until recently, the vocal minority of Tory MPs, numbering somewhere between 30 and 40, who want to be out of the European Union completely without any trade deals whatsoever, wasn't a big problem. But now the parliamentary arithmetic has changed, because Theresa May now depends almost entirely on the Democratic Unionist Party to create a small majority for her very weak government to use in Parliament to push bills through. The difficulty now is that what used to be a vocal minority inside the Tory party for a hard no-deal Brexit is now a larger number of people than the slim government majority that Theresa May has in Westminster in the House of Commons. And because of this, he believes, and I think he's right in this, that almost every time the moderates within the Conservative government try to produce a deal which is a compromise, which waters down Brexit a little bit and makes it more workable and preserves jobs, every time they produce a compromise like that and try to pass it through the Houses of Parliament, through the House of Commons, those hard Brexit MPs like Boris Johnson, Gove and Davis will just veto that. And so none of these modifications which are being made to try and come to a compromise with the European Union that they can live with, none of them can pass. Now what this means is, eventually, the European Union will find it impossible to do a deal with the Tories, with the British government, because the hard Brexit hardliners have completely stopped any kind of compromise, any kind of arrangement with the EU which would allow us to keep trading as a part of it slightly, even in just in terms of keeping in the customs union. All of that will be stopped by this vocal minority inside the Tory party, who now have sufficient numbers to completely overwhelm the majority of the government. So it looks not only likely but almost certain that the European Union will not be able to accept whatever the British government can produce, because the British government cannot produce anything like what the European Union needs to see in order to have a deal. Which means, I think, that we are looking down the barrel of a hard Brexit, a sudden cliff edge, with no deal whatsoever, which is what this hardline core of 30 or 40 MPs in the Tory party have wanted since this whole mess began. Now, had they not had the so-called referendum, this vote, this advisory vote on Europe, and decided to honour it, none of this could have happened, and these 30 or 40 Tory MPs would have continued shouting from the sidelines with no effect whatsoever. But unfortunately, David Cameron made a big mistake in calling the referendum and allowing people like Johnson and Gove and Davis and others to campaign on a series of lies which basically promised people all kinds of things that couldn't be delivered in Brexit, couldn't be delivered outside of the EU. And so now we are on a road to a hard no-deal Brexit that we can't get off. And as far as analogies are concerned, it's a bit like Scotland being strapped to the front of a bulldozer which has nobody driving it, which is stuck in first gear and heading very, very slowly towards a cliff, and nobody can stop it now. So it's a slow motion, almost like a slow motion crash. We can't get off this unless we leave this bulldozer, this thing that is out of control now. Brexit is now out of control as far as I can see. There is nobody driving this bulldozer anymore. Theresa May can't steer it, she can't brake it, she can't slow it down, she can't reverse it. And Boris Johnson and David Davis, if you want to continue the analogy, have got their feet on the accelerator and they won't let it go. We are heading inevitably now for a no deal. I don't believe anything else is now possible. And the sad fact is that changes everything. What people voted for in 2014 was what they thought was a safe option of staying in the UK. They thought it would be safe because they thought the only way of staying in Europe was to remain in the United Kingdom. And unfortunately, the Conservatives have completely altered that. They did this themselves. It wasn't the Scottish Nationalists, it wasn't anybody else but the Tories' fault. They made this happen, and they've caused the breakup of the United Kingdom. It's not the Scottish Nationalists which have done this. It's not me. It's not anybody else working for independence who have pushed us to this. But now that's the situation. And Scottish voters, whether you are SNP, Labour, even Lib Dems or even, perish the thought, Tories, are now faced with the fact that they could lose everything. Their businesses could go down, jobs can be lost, homes can be lost, food prices skyrocket, hyperinflation, a run on the pound. All of these things are now a stark reality. It's no longer just scaremongering, it's now a distinct prospect. The government is talking about what we should do when this happens. The European Union is putting arrangements in place across the 27 nations of the EU already in expectation of this happening. So it's not a distant scare anymore. It's now a physical reality, and I think we all need to be prepared to deal with it. Now, we know, because those of us who are involved in the independence movement have been saying it for a while, that Scotland is the only place in the UK at the moment which is capable of escaping this fate by simply having a referendum to leave the UK. Now, my position, as I pointed out the other day, is that, in my own opinion, if we leave the UK, then we need to join the European Free Trade Association. Alex Salmond has said this as well, I believe. The reason I suggest this, rather than remaining in the EU completely, is because it is the best possible position for us to be in after independence, because it allows us freely to trade with the EU without any friction whatsoever. It preserves the freedoms of the EU, so it allows us to come and go into the European Union, as we do now by arrangement, and it allows us to stay out of the European Union at the same time. So our sovereignty is 100% intact, and the Scottish people can decide for themselves who to trade with, how to trade with them, and can strike their own trade deals with other countries as they wish. There's one other thing which I think might be worth adding to this situation. Now, I've talked a lot about what we should do after independence, because I believe it's inevitable now, as inevitable as No Deal Brexit is. No Deal Brexit was the game changer. No Deal Brexit destroyed the UK's integrity, not the Scottish National Party and not me. The Tories have destroyed it, but having destroyed it, what we now need to do is build a future for ourselves, which takes into account the fact that we still need to trade with Ireland, with Wales and with England after we leave the UK. So if we have left both unions, then we are free to strike trading agreements with England, with Wales, and with Ireland anyway, because Ireland's in the EU and we'll be trading with them as a part of the European Free Trade Association. So no problems with Ireland, but problems with England and Wales. And I had suggested that we negotiate a trade deal with England which keeps our border open to all but travellers going to and from the European Union. There would need to be some controls over what remains of the UK Union the UK population, and the EU. So if you were English or Welsh and you wanted to travel into the European Union through Scotland, there would need to be some form of passport control. Not necessarily visas, but some other arrangement for controlling migration in and out of England and Wales. However, that is a minor difficulty compared to the massive thousands of problems that Brexit poses for four nations, all pulling in different directions, while one nation in particular wants to Brexit and the others are resisting. So that's my thoughts on this. At the moment, I think we are still waiting, as we are, because it's such a slow motion process. Barnier has already said that Europe cannot deal with this this document, this white paper as it stands, because there are too many unanswered questions, vagaries, and there's too much of a wish list. There's no actual flesh on the bones about how any of it is going to be done. So those of us who've been watching this carefully, political analysts and so on, are probably all coming to the same conclusion as I am. But I'm trying to think about how we position ourselves in the best possible place in order to maintain our trading links with the rest of the United Kingdom on a reasonably fair basis without constructing any walls. If there were to be any kind of customs control barriers put up, they would likely be put up by what remains of the Brexited UK, because they're the ones who wish to isolate themselves from Europe and to get control back of their borders. One of those borders would incidentally be across the north of England, between England and Scotland. But how hard a border it is really up to England. Scotland can leave the border open and would have probably very little difficulty in doing so. And by having customs arrangements with the rest of the UK, could quite easily deal with people coming and going through Scotland into Europe. The upsides of all of this, of course, many people have pointed out already to this scheme of mine, are that Scottish ports would suddenly become very busy, and we can develop new businesses down at our quaysides and on our riverfronts. Most of Scotland's harbours were basically mothballed by the Tories, so that all goods went in through Grimsby and the various ports in the south of England. Now, that makes sense to the south of England, made sense to London, made sense when Britain was a centrally controlled London-centric group of nations. But having left the EU and Scotland having left the UK makes things very different. It brings business back to Scotland, allows us to open our ports and larger airports a bit, and to construct new warehouses, to build new businesses in these port areas, to attract new manufacturing businesses such as the car industry into central Scotland, and to export through places like Eurocentral into our various ports such as Grangemouth, Leith, and the ports on the Clyde at Greenock and Port Glasgow. There's lots of different ports in Scotland that can be used, as well as a myriad of other smaller harbours and ports. So the knock-on effects for us would be huge in a positive way, and we could actually assist the rest of the UK to stabilise after Brexit by striking a simple free trade agreement with them as a separate state and as a member of the Free Trade Association. Our stance militarily, I think, and this is my own opinion, not anybody else's, would be to negotiate the removal of Trident almost immediately, at least remove the nuclear missiles from Coolport and from Faslane, and negotiate at the time, because the British government has invested a lot of money in moving its entire submarine fleet up to Faslane very shortly, negotiate at least a rental agreement until the British government can find places to harbour its submarines, but initially take the nuclear weapons away and gradually phase out the British submarine fleet until a Scottish defence arrangement can be made and we can use that site at Faslane as its HQ. My own opinion about defence is that we should probably go down the Swiss route, which is to become a neutral country, in much the same way that the Republic of Ireland is neutral. And by doing so, we don't have to maintain such a large defensive or offensive army, navy and air force, thereby saving billions of pounds every year that we can put back into the economy and back into public services. And by remaining neutral, we stop attracting terrorists to our cities by not provoking or taking part in unnecessary oil wars, and we can also play a role in helping to ameliorate the problems of warfare by perhaps having a global assistance force, using some of our ships to help with hospital duties and to rebuild shattered countries which have been ravaged by warfare. So turn our abilities in terms of military to some better purpose. Anyway, those are my views today, and also a little bit of news about what John Major has been saying. As usual, if you've got any opinions on content of the show, please get in touch with me in the usual way. But I hope you have a restful Sunday, and just think on that we are very slowly heading towards a cliff in a bulldozer which is not being driven by anybody at all, and we need to get off. And we need to get off and find our own place in the world, and find the best place to be for our trade, for our security, and for our relationships with other countries. That's it for today. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.